Hi, everybody, and welcome to Leadership Labs, an online experience for marketplace leaders who want to hone their skills and add more value to their organizations. Our special guest today is Chris McChesney. Chris is the co-author of the best-selling book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution. Chris has coached literally dozens of organizations through the principles he's about to share with you, including Marriott International, the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Company, the Coca-Cola Company, Chick-fil-A, and our organization, North Point Community Church. Now, we all have organizational goals. There's nothing unique about that. But executing on those goals, that's the challenge. And that's what Chris is going to talk to us about today. And be sure to stick around until the end, and I'm going to tell you how you can access a free resource for you and your team to debrief on this content together. Now, here's my friend, Chris McChesney.
So over 20 years ago, a very interesting author and CEO consultant named Ram Charan, he's had a couple of interesting books out. He was advising our leadership team at Franklin Covey. And if you don't know, we develop leaders and we have for decades. So we're now getting consulted too by Ram Charan. And he asked us 2 questions. And these 2 questions changed the whole direction of our organization. And I don't know why we had never asked the 2 questions, but I'll give them to you. His first question, he says, Franklin Covey, with all your experience working with leaders, do you think that leaders struggle more with strategy or do they struggle more with execution? And immediately everybody in the room was like, execution. But his next question got us. His next question was, what do we teach leaders? What do we train them in? If you get an MBA, if you go to business school, do you learn execution or do you learn strategy and business planning? And I could just see all the energy in the room just sort of left right then. And we were just like, what have we been doing? But it caused us to really reflect on the idea that what leaders have been taught is not what they're frustrated with. So we started putting more and more resources into this. And for 20 years, in a sense, we've fallen in love with this problem of helping leaders execute strategy. And there was one observation that showed up right away. We started to notice that the frustrating part of execution revolves around any part of the plan that requires a change in human behavior, right? Someone's got to do something differently, or we really need them to be engaged. Like, it's something that we can't just dictate. That was the rub. That answered the question of why is this harder than we think it's going to be? And we did a whole bunch of research on why is this so hard? And we found a variety of things that caused and affected driving strategies that require a change in human behavior. But the second observation was the real root cause behind it all. And it was hiding in plain sight. The reason that it's so hard, in our experience, to execute a plan or a strategy that requires that change in human behavior has to do with the day job. And I love the expression that fish are often the last to discover water. I think this is a great way to think about this. A fish is the last to discover water because the water's everywhere and it's always been there. And this is how the day job was. This is how the whirlwind was. We didn't even see it. We were so used to it. But once we saw it, we started to realize no leader gets a pass on this. Every leader, you right now listening to this, there's a part of your brain that's nagging at you, telling you need to be doing something urgent. Right? This conflict between the enormous amount of energy required to maintain the operation, just to stay out of trouble, is in constant conflict with the priorities to move the organization forward. They're both essential, maintaining the operation, improving the operation. They're not the same. Worse, they don't get along. They compete for time, energy, and attention, and the urgency dominates. And the more we started to look at execution through this lens, the more we started to see where the breakdown points were. There's this common sort of leadership fallacy, and I'm as guilty as anyone. And it goes a little like this. If we could just get them to understand how important this is, they would do it. And in truth, importance is not a great driver of human behavior. Urgency is, right? And the whirlwind is urgent. The goals for moving the operation forward, those are important. And so we started to zero in on the real problem with execution, and that it wasn't about necessarily executing a goal. It was about an organization or a team's ability to execute that goal in the middle of a 100-mile-an-hour whirlwind. So that was the job to be done. And with that perspective, the principles started to line up. And the more we worked at it and the more we experimented with it, that's where the research, we had done a bunch of research, but wasn't that valuable. What was really valuable was the trial and error. And eventually, over time, 4 principles started to emerge. And and again, 4 principles that allow a leader to execute on a strategy that require a change in human behavior. The first of those principles was focus. And what we call the disciplines is just how we apply that principle. And the focus piece had to do with creating really tight clarity between what was the day job, what was the whirlwind, and then the term we used was a WIG, or a wildly important goal. This was a goal that was sort of taken out of the whirlwind and it was given special treatment. I like the idea that it's sort of like intensive care. Okay? It might not even be the most important. This isn't a prioritization exercise, but it's the one that needs to be in intensive care. It's the one that has this critical gap, and it's one that I can't achieve without getting people's buy-in, without getting them to do something different. If you've ever had an objective that you really wanted to pursue, and you realized, if the team isn't into this, this won't be worth doing. Like, it won't work to push a rope on this one. That's kind of the space we're in. And inevitably, there's always some part of a strategy that feels that way. Well, discipline 1, focus on the wildly important, was all about translating strategic intent, like what we want to do. We want to be more consultative in our sales approach, and it's going to allow us to do this and this and this, and we can talk for days about this, all the intent behind our strategy, and it's to get away from all of that and get it down to one critical objective. And so, for instance, we are going to improve, or we are going to increase the number of Category 2 accounts, the really consultative ones, from 7 to 12 by the end of the year. Like, can we just state it? We learned that the 2 best friends of good execution was simplicity and transparency. So it wasn't just about narrowing the focus or just pulling out of the whirlwind one critical objective. It was also about sort of like the way you focus a camera. It was getting really clear on exactly where are we now, where do we need to be, and by when. And sometimes that wildly important goal would have to be achieved through the work of a variety of teams. Well, if that was the case, then each team, in addition to their whirlwind, needed to identify a team-level, wildly important goal, sort of a battle that was critical for winning the war. So the bottom line on this, first discipline, and I really like the word discipline because it's not just a good idea. It requires discipline to really think through this. The first discipline was translating strategic intent to the fewest number of executable targets at the front line. That's discipline 1. So now, let's say we've got several teams, and each team might have a different wildly important goal that's going to contribute to the overarching goal. Each team has that wildly important goal in addition to their whirlwind. In our experience, that whirlwind is going to eat about 80% of people's energy. One of the ways that we explain this to leaders is, look, you got 2 jobs. Whether anyone told you this or not, when they hired you, job 1 is the whirlwind. That's not job 2, that's job 1. So whatever they gave you, don't break it. Right? In healthcare, they call that the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. That is job 1. But it's not your only job. Job 1 is great in a career if you want to keep a job. But your second job, that's about moving forward. That's about working on the system, not just in the system. That's about playing offense, not just defense. And job 2 is great if you want to get promoted. right? Job 2 is where you look and you say, okay, in addition to the whirlwind, what's that one strategic objective that we need to accomplish? So discipline 1 is all about getting that clarity. And by the way, the clearer that is, the clearer the wildly important goal is from the day-to-day, the things that have to be sustained versus the area where we need the breakthrough, the clearer that distinction is, the lower the complexity on the team is. All right, so that sets up discipline 2. Discipline 2 says act on the lead, L-E-A-D, lead measure. It's all about, discipline 2 is all about leverage. The principle is leverage. And it's about turning that objective at the team level into something that feels like a winnable game. So the objective itself gives us a lagging measure. So I'll use a personal example. If I wanted to lose weight, right, the weight loss going from 195 to 185 pounds, that's the lagging measure. The lead measures, and you know this, right, as soon as I put it in a weight context, are number of calories burned, number of calories consumed, or reducing the number of calories consumed and increasing the calories burned. And you might think, well, everybody knows that. Sure, everybody does know that. What everybody doesn't know is how many calories they've eaten and how many calories. Everybody knows diet and exercise. The people that are losing weight can tell you how many calories they've eaten and how many calories they've burned. And this relationship between what the team chooses as their lead measures and the wildly important goal, it feels a little like a bet. We're betting if we did these, in addition to everything else that we're doing, if we did these 2 things, we could get this output. This is a strategic bet, and it needs to feel like a winnable game, and the team needs a voice in doing that. Discipline 3, we got to throw the game on switch. If all we do is set it up, if all we do is define, in addition to our day job, this is the wildly important goal, these are the 2 lead measures, and we all agree and we lock arms, and we get everybody's involvement, and then we go back into the whirlwind, it's dead. Like a week later, this is what we've learned. Maybe it's different where you work, but a week later, people can't even remember what that meeting was about. Discipline 3, we throw the game on switch. And the way that happens is we have to see the game. We're very visual, right? Discipline 3 is create a compelling scoreboard. So in addition to everything I know I have to do in the whirlwind, can I see in real time, the term we use is player scoreboard. Can I see right now, are we winning or losing? Can I see how, very simple, can I see how we're doing on the lag measure, the result? Can I see how we're doing on the lead measures, the diet, the exercise measures? I might have a lead measure around leads from existing clients or referral leads, right? I might have a lag measure around new accounts or first appointments. But we don't know for sure it's going to work, but we think it's going to work. And it's actually the uncertainty that makes it a little bit interesting. It's not very much fun to work a puzzle or a game if you already know the answer. And what we found was the uncertainty associated with goal achievement provides a great mechanism for engagement. We tell leaders, give the team several lead measure options and let them choose. And then discipline 3 is we got to see it. How do we want to present this? How do we want to show this? So disciplines 1, 2, and 3 is all about setting up a winnable game in addition to the day job. And I'm going to say this again. I want to remind you, job 1 is the day job. Okay? It eats first and it eats a lot. But if our whole life is whirlwind, if our whole life is just playing defense, if our whole life is just let me get to Friday without somebody yelling at me, that tends to suck the soul out of a team, and it feels like futility. On contrast, having my whirlwind and 10 other objectives, in addition to holding down the fort, also feels like futility. And what we found was the sweet spot is whirlwind plus 1. By the time you're through discipline 3, you can see it. You see the wildly important goal. You see the lead measures, right? And it should not only feel like a winnable game, but at this point, it should start feeling like a high-stakes game. This should not feel like preseason football. This should feel like playoffs. And we found that the leader's intent is really powerful. If your intent is to help each team have a winnable game that's going to contribute to a critical strategy, and that they feel that it's really important if they win, it has an enormous effect on engagement. Discipline 4 is create a cadence of accountability. Having this weekly cadence where every member of the team makes a commitment to drive the lead measure. That's like the notion, if you've ever heard the expression, force against leverage, right? The weekly commitments, that's the force against the lever. And what we see is that there's usually a period of 3, but it's usually 4 or 5 weeks where a team is really putting energy against the lead measure and the lag measure won't respond. And the leader has to really maintain this cadence and this rhythm. And then about 5 or 6 weeks in, that's usually where you see the lag measure start to move. And as soon as that happens, there's a pop in engagement. And by the way, we weren't expecting this. When we were first experimenting with this methodology, we were all about correlation and causation and trying to understand what was predictive and how to define this stuff. We weren't thinking about human engagement at all. And we were sort of late to the party. Our clients had to tell us, you're missing it. Every time this is done right, there's this pop in engagement. And we found this research from the 1960s by a guy named Frederick Hertzberg. Some of you might know that name. And what he taught was that engagement, which is very different than employee satisfaction, that employee engagement only comes from 2 things and always comes from these 2 things. And he defined them as progress and purpose. And we had been defining them as, am I winning? And is it a big deal, right? Is it a winnable game? Is it a high stakes game? So the bottom line on this methodology, if I'm really serious about driving a strategy that requires hearts and minds, I've got to think of this idea around whirlwind plus 1, right? If everybody's plus 1, if each of the teams plus 1 was like a gold coin, right? It was like a currency. And as a leader, what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about, where do we spend that currency? Right? Maybe all the currency needs to go against one objective. Maybe I need to have half the currency over here about improving quality, but we also have a new product launch, and we need the other teams, their currency going here. But as a leader, it starts by sort of separating these 2 roles. The more the day job and the wildly important goals start to overlap, the worse it gets. It starts to unravel, and creating clear delineation seems to be essential. The organizations that have gotten good at this have developed a capacity to put energy against non-urgent priorities. Now, that might not sound that hard, but it's really hard because the urgent priorities never stop. The day job, the whirlwind, it never stops. Now we're into this a little longer. Now you've been sitting here for more than 15 minutes. Now you're itching. Like many of you have already checked out. Many of you have already checked an email. People have tried to interrupt you. You've just tried to get away from the whirlwind for 20 minutes and you found it almost impossible. This is sort of discovering, right, a fish discovering water. It's all encompassing. Organizations that can develop the capacity to put energy against non-urgent activities in the face of other urgencies have a unique competitive advantage. It pays dividends for organizations. It pays dividends for careers. In closing, I'll say this, and I wish I had said this, but I didn't say this. If you've seen the book or read the book, Atomic Habits, I'm a big fan, by the way. I haven't met James Clear, but I love his work. I love his approach. I highly recommend it. Clear says something I wish I would have said. He said, we don't rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems. And when I heard that, that went right through me. It's not the emotional charge or the early commitment that ends up accomplishing the goals. It's a system. And in our world, this was particularly true. The 4 disciplines that I just took you through are a system for putting energy against non-urgent strategic priorities. And it's as valuable a capability as a leader and an organization can develop. Thank you so much for listening.
And now you know why we love Chris McChesney around here and why we are so excited about the 4 disciplines of execution. Now, to help you and your team craft your wildly important goal, we have created a free resource. Just visit the link at the bottom of the screen and you'll find personal reflection and team discussion questions to look at. Also, we have included a link to his book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution. As always, thank you so much for joining us at Leadership Labs. If you like this content, please share it with a friend, and we will see you next time.